We also learned today that the president continues to believe, against all the evidence, that there were very fine people on both sides at the alt-right neo-Nazi white supremacist Unite the Right rally that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia 2 summers ago.
The president says his original statement about very fine people on both sides was answered perfectly.
President Trump suggesting a moral equivalence between Nazis and those protesting Nazis.
Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation, and that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And in that moment, I knew the threat to this nation was unlike any I had ever seen in my lifetime.
He's basing his campaign on a debunked hoax, the most divisive race hoax in American history, the Fine People Hoax. They'll show the edited video, which is the hoax. If they show the whole video, it shows Trump without prompting, and this is the important part, there was no prompting, said, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, they should be condemned totally. If you leave that part out, it could be misunderstood that he was praising the people with the torches. And so, in order not to be misconstrued later, without prompting, Trump clarified to make sure you wouldn't interpret it wrong. And they lopped that part off and made it the central part of Biden's campaign.
Mr. President, are you putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane?
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is.
On both sides, sir? You said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Kill the person. Heather hired
Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as you. And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group. Excuse me. I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country.
Why do you believe that the president said the right thing during Charlottesville?
Well, I'll tell you, the main reason is because I can read, and I have read the transcript. So rather than believing in a fairy tale narrative, if we deal in the actual evidence, and in this case, that is a transcript of what was said, it's impossible to determine anything except for his intention, which was to totally condemn racism. And I have to say, Chris, the way you edited that segment that you showed just before this was appallingly misleading because you cut the quote off at a critical juncture. If you continue the quote you were showing, and I want to quote directly here because I want to be extremely precise, he said, you had people in that group who were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. He then continued in the next answer, I am not talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists because they should be condemned totally, end quote. So he was unequivocal that he was not talking about racists or neo-Nazis, but the way you deceptively edited what you just showed
there's nothing
made it look
about
as though he was.
All right, so
what Biden said, that the president called white supremacists fine people. Is that what really happened?
That's exactly not what happened. And you can go and you can look up the full speech of what Trump said. He specifically said, I am not speaking about white supremacists or Nazis. So this is not a legitimate issue at all. And what's really bizarre is that Joe Biden, of all people, would use this as a way to launch his campaign. This is a man who was mentored by Robert Byrd, a literal KKK member. This is a man that said that black people should remain segregated in 1972 because it's what we wanted. He has issues with black America, and I'm really happy to see that people on both sides in the political aisle, black Americans that are Democrat and Republican, have spoken up and pointed out his hypocrisies.
The senator made a very moving and eloquent speech as a son of the Confederacy, acknowledging that it was time to change and yield to a position that Senator Carol Moseley Braun raised on the floor of the Senate, not granting a federal charter to a organization made up of many fine people who continue to display the Confederate flag